It's basically Tinder profiles for book lovers. This is the cover. This isn't gonna be all smiles and roses. Hello and welcome. Today we are solving the age-old rivalry, US or UK. If you can't tell from my accent, I am from the UK. And I'm going to try and keep biases outside of this debate because it's reductive, it's superficial, it is subjective, it is my opinions on book covers selected by me. But because the bias is probably there as a pig-headed British woman, I want to give a little leg up and a little hi, have a free thing to our US audience with our sponsor of this video, Book of the Month. Well, hello and welcome to my current reading corner. I am jubilated, ecstatic, over the moon to be sponsored by Book of the Month for this video. For those of you who haven't heard of them before, they are a bunch of bookworms that run a lovely monthly book service, and they have been since, get this, 1926. 1926. They obviously know what they're on about. So they're on a mission to support new and emerging authors and help you find the books you'll really love. Now I have a case of the exploding TBR. My doctor says it's chronic. So with the overwhelming amount of books being published, this is fab because they literally vet hundreds of books for you and pick the best of the best, so you can spend less time researching, more time actually reading. It's not complicated. Every month they send you a list of books to pick from. You pick the one you reckon you're gonna like the most and they post it to you. That's it, sorted. And if you don't fancy any of the ones that month, it's no problem. You can skip any month that you wish. These are the 5 they have this month. We've got Once There Were Wolves by Charlotte McConaghay, which is set in the Scottish Highlands and is about biologists. The Heart Principle by Helen Hoang, which is a rom-com featuring burnout and open relationships. Damnation Spring by Ash Davidson, which is about a community who live among the Californian redwood trees. The Inheritance of Orchidia Divina, which sounds like a very mysterious family drama about inheritance. And then Not a Happy Family, which is what happens when a killer comes to call at a couple's residence in upstate New York. And the one that I am picking this month, I think, is going to be Once There Were Wolves, because the biologists are actually working on reintroducing wolves into the wild and rewilding, which is something that I read about in a non-fiction book called Feral, and I'd be so interested to see how it plays out in fiction. It sounds really interesting, and also it's short. I love a short book, you know that. So if you are in the USA, and only if you're in the USA, sorry, Book of the Month only ships to US addresses right now. You can head to bookofthemonth.com to check out their other picks and use code FRESH5, human microphone for the people at the back, repeat after me, FRESH5, to get your first book for $9.99. New authors get supported, you get a lovely hardback at a good price and more time to read. I see no downsides here, everybody wins. So big thanks to Book of the Month for supporting the channel. And speaking of winning, I'm gonna really need to know who wins this. Let's go. What are my credentials, I hear you ask? I worked in the book publishing industry for like most of my 20s. I was in a lot of cover meetings, and I also used to write sales copy for a little while for books that were published in the UK and we had UK rights for, and we were selling them in to the US market, which meant my job was to go through, tweak the copy of the descriptions of the books, sometimes even the titles, so that they were fit for a US market. So I spent a lot of time speaking to US salespeople and US distributors, talking about the differences between the US and the UK markets when it comes to a specific book and how they can be better tailored to find the right audience in these two similar and yet very different countries. Now, I have only selected books that I have read myself because I believe that a good book cover not only needs to attract the right audience, and to know the right audience you have to know what's in the book, it has to represent the book without giving it away or cheapening it, and it also just needs to look nice superficially. Book covers are pieces of art, so they also kind of need to stand up as a piece of art. Book cover designers have their work cut out, and I think they're an incredible bunch of people. And one of my favourite things to do, don't judge, is analyse book covers. So let's go. A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. This is one I selected on purpose. because I think it demonstrates perfectly the difference between the US and the UK audiences and how they sell in to each other. So A Little Life, if you don't know, is a really heartbreaking, very brutal, very long literary novel. It had a huge amount of hype about 5 years ago, and it found its way into lots of people's hands. It became quite contentious. Lots of people didn't like it. Lots of people loved it. But from my perspective, in the industry, I was just seeing that it may be finding its way into the hands of people who wouldn't like it. And that's the fault of the way we as a book industry describe books to people. It's not always trying to find the widest audience, because then you tend to get bad reviews if it's not a widely appealing book. The point is to find the right people for the right books. It's basically Tinder profiles for book lovers. So A Little Life in the US looks like this. The cover is in black and white. It's quite classic, it's quite timeless. It's very obvious from the cover that there's going to be pain in this book, and it's also quite human. The UK cover looks like this. Typography, a white background usually signifies a more commercial cover, something that could be sold in W.H. Smith Travel, something that a casual reader would pick up on their way through a train station. And the background of the typography is these very famous New York red fire escapes. So from a UK perspective, this instantly says, it's a book to immerse myself in New York. It doesn't look too serious. I'll pick it up. While I think that sold a lot of UK audiences on this cover, it also, I don't think, lands in the same way that me having read it with this cover would have. And I think this cover is also really clever because it lent itself to an amazing social media campaign that was maybe arguably too cheery considering the subject matter, but it was definitely very effective, and I think a really emotive, beautiful cover that was just so different to the UK one. So it's 1 point to the US. The next one is Actress by Anne Enright. This is a novel set in Dublin, and it follows a young daughter throughout her life as she lives in the shadow of a quite eccentric and sometimes problematic mother who was a famous actress. The US cover is undeniably more beautiful. The colours are lovely. I love the cheeky curious woman appearing at the bottom. Of course she's ginger, it's set in Ireland. I guess, sure. But in general, I think this cover is much more beautiful. However, for me, the UK cover wins because it communicates a story. This is a small girl looking out on a stage at her mother, and you can see that there is going to be a dynamic there, and you can also see from whose perspective this book comes. So in that way, I think it is less commercial because it, again, is a very literary book, and it shows a truer version of what's actually in the book. So that is 1 to the UK. My boobs are sweating at the tension. Who will win? Next, we've got Asking for It, a book set in Ireland about sexual assault and the way that communities and the tabloids react to accusations about promising young men. The US cover, you'd think, is one that follows the same lines as A Little Life, and therefore I'd like it, but I think in this context it's a little bit too on the nose, and also because of the tears, because it's in sepia and not black and white. It really follows that fetishizing pain memoir trope that I think kind of does a disservice to what the story is and the point of the story is, because again, this is a lot more politically motivated novel than A Little Life. Maybe not. Argue that in the comments if you've read them both. But for me, I think this cover wouldn't help it find the right audience because it probably fall much more into the pain memoir kind of genre than is correct, I think. And then also I think people who would be intrigued by the message of this book and the kind of very jarring, quipping kind of humour and paciness of it with the horrific subject matter might miss this book, and that would be a tragedy. However, Asking for It UK cover, it has this more symbolic demonstration of a Barbie popping her knee, and then the more tabloid typography, Asking for It in capital letters. There's a lot more agency here, there's a lot more colour, it's definitely for a younger audience than the US one, and overall I just think it does a much more punchy job of showing what the book is about. Detransition Baby, I reviewed this in my Women's Fiction Prize video, which is up here if you'd like to watch it, but this book is obviously tasked with the hard task of representing the many layers of gender transition that the characters grapple with and talk about in this book. The UK one, this looks more commercial than the book actually reads, and for that reason I don't know if it's a complete representation of it, although obviously they're trying to sell copies of books, so who can blame them. But I also think that this just takes a kind of weird symbolic stance on it. Like, why are there ribbons? What's unraveling? It's a kind of weird symbolism, and the colour palette as well just is quite muted, I think, for the strong and quite punchy writing that this has. The US cover has this amazing abstract design that really blends our ideas of identities, and also there's these popping eyes that like look out at you and confront you. It's just visually a lot more beautiful, a lot more creative, and I think a lot more curiosity inducing. It makes you look twice at the cover and really inspect it. So I think this would attract a really curious audience, perhaps audiences that haven't really read that much about trans issues, but are confronted by this really intriguing cover that I think demonstrates a discussion about identity without it looking too lighthearted. And I don't know, this just like the UK one feels like a mummy memoir to me. Do you know what I mean? Sorry. It doesn't even look like it's a fiction book. Oh, it's too old, fucking hell. Okay, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I pulled this one up because I think it's really interesting, because on first glance, you'd say, Lena, these covers are quite similar. How could you make a judgment call? Now, they're both harking to the imagery of the glamorous 20s and 30s, and they're also, I think, using the iconography of atonement to draw you in. No, but they're actually slightly different approaches. This is a US book and a US author, so I'm guessing that the US cover happened first and then the UK were like riffing off that cover. But you'll see from the US version, it's kind of unclear that this character is not white. Like, she's white passing and that's part of the narrative, but she is not a white character, and I think this one makes it look like she's white, and then also that she's in this really passive position. It's very luxurious. It could be the cover of a romance novel, and you know, the steamy ones. Whereas the UK cover, yeah, looks a bit similar from far away, but she's got a power stance. She is, I think when I first saw this cover, I saw that she wasn't white, and she's also like kind of facing away from the viewer and then looking back. And I think this is a much more powerful representation of the character of Evelyn, and is just way more intriguing. I think when you look at a cover, it's quite fun to subconsciously be challenged. Like, it doesn't look like this woman wants to give away her secrets or show you inside her life, and that's what's so salacious and kind of scandalous about the book, because that's what it is. It's an expose. Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss. This is a book, very briefly, about LARPing in the UK, which is live action roleplay. It's when people go away for the weekend or for a week and just literally live like they're in medieval times or another time period in UK, I guess usually English history. It's a very dark take on that, and it's there to demonstrate the kind of misinterpretations of British history and who wins and who actually benefits from romanticising those times. So it is critical of it, but the US cover is very different, and I would say it's quite a ghostly book. It's a bit scary, and while there is, like, maybe if you squint your eyes you can kind of see a skull in the US cover, it's essentially selling you some cottagecore vibes, which once you open the book you'll be pissed because that's not in there. So I think, again, maybe the person who designed this cover either didn't read the book or didn't care about the book, but it feels like a very weird fetishization of like British countryside, rather than the UK cover, which warns you that this isn't going to be all smiles and roses. Normal People was an interesting one because I'm much more on the fence about this one. Obviously the book covers draw from each other, but there's something really kind of almost became infamous about this colour green when Normal People was first booming and becoming really famous in the UK. And also this iconography that I've seen people get tattoos of, where it's two intimate people that you can't quite tell their gender from far away, and they're in this kind of almost gross thing of like being in a sardine can, and it's supposed to be like, you know, they're like sardines, they're so close, they're so intimate. So it's an intriguing bit of iconography that makes you look twice, which is what you want people to do when they're in a bookshop. But then the US cover is a much more like divided, like gender, like the boy is in blue, the girl is above him, who will win? It feels much more like a kind of sports cover in some ways, and there's definitely like a lack of intimacy there. It's a book about, this looks like it's a book about romance and distrust and breaking up, and what it's actually about is the nuances of intimacy and class. So I think the UK cover, which was probably originally an Irish cover, let's be honest, the cover that was used in the UK is a lot more emotive, is a lot more subtle, and I think better sells the book. Oh, come on US, you gotta get some wins, I'm sweating for you. Okay, so Ashley Doty Charles is and this is relevant, black, queer, UK presenter and writer, and she is incredible. This book is about why everyone is talking and no one is listening. It's a book that references You've Been Shamed by Jon Ronson, but takes it further and also talks about her experiences with racism online and queerness, and it definitely adds an extra layer and also just expands, clarifies and modernises the ideas in Jon Ronson's book, which is actually kind of a bit old now. So I thought this book was absolutely genre defining, incredible, and intellectual, blessing. And this is the cover it got in the UK. Yeah, that's a toilet door. We get it. It's engaged. It also from a distance looks like a weighing scale, so I automatically was like, this is a diet book, I'm not picking this up. Thankfully I did anyway, but only after I saw the US cover. So much better, right? It hasn't attempted to visually represent the ideas in Doty's book. It's just put the text in the shape of, what's the name of those things? Shouty phones? Gramophones? No, that doesn't sound right either. You know, bah, 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 those things. But it hasn't given us much else apart from a punchy colour. And actually, I think that's all it needs. The title and the subtitle are so strong that it didn't need the messiness and also like kind of like white self-help vibe that the UK one gave off. So US, you win this one. However, I would like to put in a quick complaint for on the US and UK websites now, the paperback version of this book has this cover. I think about this in the small moments of my life before I go to sleep when I'm washing up, and I try to work out whether a wolf in sheep's clothing has any kind of analogy to what Doty was trying to do. Really, this incredibly intelligent black queer author writes a book about the nuances of the internet and you put a sheep on the front cover. A sheep! I can't even. Please read this book, even if you don't like the covers. It's incredible and this book deserved better. Okay, shake it out. Moving on. The Overstory by Richard Powers. God, how I love this book. It's really long and really it follows like 9 characters. So attempting anything other than using the iconography of a tree would be silly. So I'm glad both designers just picked the tree. Thank you. I'm not against the UK cover. It's obviously very beautiful and with the hand-drawn typography and stuff, it's nice. But this cutting up of the tree is something that it does reference something in the book, long story, but it does kind of reference something in the book, but I wouldn't know that without reading the book. And if I hadn't read the book, that wouldn't have drawn me in. The idea of a tree being in different stages of life. It's not really strong iconography, and I think the use of primary colours as well, it doesn't make it really strong or draw people in. The US cover I love, I think, because there's this idea of circular narratives, which I interviewed him once, and I'll leave the link to the interview below because we talk about circular narratives in that interview. But he has written this book that's incredibly surrealist as well as incredibly accessible and action-packed, page-turner, beautifully written, literary, but you're never bored. And I think this kind of like surrealist painting thing communicates that it's literary, but it also has momentum and it keeps moving. So US cover, hands down, wins this one. Oh, creeping up on the UK. Yard Yazi! Oh my god, Transcendent Kingdom. I'll leave the link up there to my review of this, but it deserves to be a classic. Read in schools, read forever. Really incredible book. I'll leave the article that backs me up on this below, but one of the, not criticisms, but the realities of US covers often means that they say what they see. They literally show what's in the book on the front cover and avoid metaphors a little bit more. Now that's a generalisation, we can debate that. There have been covers in this video that have disproved that, like the Detransition Baby cover, but in general that's something. So with the US cover you can see that they've just been like, there's a black woman in this, and she does pray at some point, so let's put her in a position of prayer. So when you combine that iconography with the word kingdom, it becomes a very religious book, no, to the reader, or at least like something that's going to tackle the light and dark there and religion. And again, because there's a bigger proportion of the US that I would say is like actively and proudly religious, I think that that's probably intentional. But I think the UK cover really does something a little bit special. If you look really closely at this really just superficially beautiful cover, you'll see there's like a basketball court in there, there's some flowers that link to the story as well, and it's just a really beautifully entwined book, and it actually doesn't look like a lot of the other stuff that's in the UK at the moment, so it's quite distinct in that way, especially like that colour of green with that tone of pink I haven't seen in a very long time. There's nothing like it on the market, so it's really sticking up for the book, I think, and showing all the different facets that it has in it. It's definitely not just a book about prayer, and for me I think this represents what's actually in the book a lot better and would just appeal to a wider amount of people. Okay, last one, When Breath Becomes Air. So this is a really complicated one for me because I actually own the hardback, but the hardback looks like this on the back. So on the front it's a doctor in his scrubs, and then on the back it's the same person but in a patient's gown, which is the narrative of it's a memoir. It's really beautifully written. It's reflections on death and endings by a man who was a neurosurgeon and then found out that he had cancer and was going to imminently die. That's not a spoiler, that's in the blurb. It's an incredible read, please read it. It's really as hopeful as it is depressing. In the UK, I can see why they went for this cover because there's a huge medical market. What's the word? It's a medical memoir market, I guess, of books that are in this colour that look pretty much like this, and that's actually a really good function of the marketing of covers, and it's very intentionally done, especially because most of the artists are like in-house and they're being, you know, that's what publishers do. I think sometimes it's like, that artist stole that artist's cover, and I'm like, no, they're the same artist sometimes, or at least in the same department or from the same conglomerate massive company, and it's an intention to copy covers because you're speaking in a visual language to show a reader who's loved a book what they might love next. So I can completely understand why this cover is the way it is, and it is clever when you have the hardback and you can see the whole thing, but it doesn't really translate online. And for me, I had to read this book for work, loved it, became one of my favourite books ever, but would not have picked it up with this cover. However, the US have done a bit more of a classy job of it. It's a kind of off-white, so I think a little bit more mature and tasteful, and not just like self-help, when breath becomes air, how to breathe properly, mindfulness. It kind of like very narrowly but skillfully avoided that. I'm not the fan of like, you know, it's just the word air, so they put a feather with it. That's not in the book, sure. But I do think it's really beautiful and kind of like shows a bit more of the truth of the book, because it is much more of an introspective book about, you know, philosophy and death than it is just like him being like, and then this happened, and then this happened to me, and then this happened. Do you know what I mean? It's not really a through narrative. It's more of like reflections on what it is to know that you're going to die. So for that reason, even though I'm really on the fence, I'm gonna give that one to the US. What are the final scores? Oh God, what have I done? It's okay, the UK won by 1 point. But you know, you put up a good fight, and seeing as me, a British person, was the one who picked the entries, I think you did pretty well. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, if you liked your time here and you might want to be here again, think about subscribing. Thank you again to our sponsors, Book of the Month. And if you are in the US, there's a link you might like below. Go on, go on. If you want to watch more book videos with my face in it, you can do that by clicking on this square. YouTube thinks that you'll like this video, and I think that you might like this video. Tell me your most trivial, subjective, and arbitrary hot takes on these covers below. Frogsnog out.